So have you ever really stopped to think about the English you learned in school? Why the big goal was always to get that perfect American or British accent? Or why your textbook was just filled with these smiling people at airports and in fancy boardrooms? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden story of global English. We'll look at what it's really selling you and how it's changing in ways your old teachers probably never saw coming.
Okay, let's kick things off with a story that I think pretty much all of us can relate to on some level. It comes from a linguist, David Block, and he's talking about his very first teaching job. All he wanted was a manual, just a simple set of rules, someone to tell him the right way to teach. And that feeling, that hunt for the one single correct way to do things, that's exactly where our story really begins.
Because you see, it turns out that David Block's search wasn't just a personal thing. Nope. It actually reflects this huge, incredibly influential idea that has shaped English classrooms for decades. And what's that idea? It's the belief that there's one single, somehow better version of English that every single person should be trying to speak. Does that ring a bell? I bet it does. All those grammar drills, the endless vocabulary lists, the accent practice, it was all designed for one thing, to turn you into a perfect copy of a so-called native speaker. And look, for millions upon millions of us, that was the entire experience of learning English. So the big question is, where did this whole idea even come from? Well, that whole one right way to speak English, it didn't just magically appear. It was actually a really powerful ideology, and it was carefully packaged and sold all over the world, kind of like a product. And to really truly get how this all went down, we need to wrap our heads around one key concept. So the term is ideoscape. Yeah, I know, it sounds a bit academic, but it was coined by an anthropologist named Arjun Epidari, and the idea is actually pretty simple. Just picture a global river of ideas, things like human rights or democracy or environmentalism, just flowing across borders. And what's so wild is that the idea of the best way to teach a language became one of these massive, powerful, world-spanning ideoscapes. And when it comes to teaching languages, the big, dominant idea that took over was something called communicative language teaching, or CLT for short. It came out of the West and it was pushed as this new, modern, much better way to learn. The focus was supposed to be on having real conversations, not just, memorizing a bunch of grammar rules from some old, dusty textbook. And you can see right here how this whole thing wasn't an accident at all. It was a process. Step 1. The Council of Europe lays the foundation back in the 60s and 70s. Then, that turns into this specific method we just talked about, CLT. And then, and this is the really crucial part, it gets exported everywhere, all around the globe, and it's branded as the best way to do it, often completely ignoring what might work better locally or what fits a different culture.
Okay, so that's the how, the method they used. But what about the what? What about the actual materials, like the textbooks? Let's dive into that now, because here's the thing. When you're trying to sell a language course to the entire planet, you have to be extremely careful about what you actually put in it.
And this leads us to a little industry secret. It's a rule of thumb for these huge global publishers, and it goes by the acronym PARSNIP. See, if you want to make a textbook you can sell in Tokyo and Toronto and Dubai without anyone getting upset, you have to strip out anything even remotely controversial. So that means no politics, no alcohol, no religion, no sex, no narcotics, no items of any kind, and definitely no pork. Everything gets sanitized.
So that leads to a pretty obvious question, right? If you take out all the messy, complicated, and frankly interesting parts of being human, what on earth is left to talk about for hundreds of pages in a textbook?
The answer? You stop selling content and you start selling an identity. And it's a very specific, very aspirational one that can be marketed anywhere in the world, the ideal cosmopolitan consumer. So get this, your textbook wasn't just teaching you English, it was selling you on a whole lifestyle. And this person, the global citizen from the textbook, they look something like this. They're successful or they're on their way, they're always on the move, jet-setting for work or fun, they know all about global celebrities, they have the latest tech. They're basically the poster child for the global middle class. And the message, loud and clear, is that English is the magic key that unlocks this whole way of life. Okay, but here's the major plot twist in this whole story. While this super clean, standardized, one-size-fits-all English was being packaged and sold in textbooks, the real language, out in the world, was doing something totally different. It was adapting, it was evolving, it was changing.
And this is where we see a massive shift in how we think about language. The old way, what we call the deficit model, was simple. If you didn't sound exactly like someone from the UK or the US, you were making a mistake. You had failed. But the new difference model totally flips the script. It says, whoa, hold on, that's not a mistake. That's a feature of a new, local version of the language. The language isn't broken, it's just adapted.
Let me give you a perfect example. In the English you probably learned, the word furniture is uncountable, right? You can't say furnitures. That would get a red mark. But in Indian English and in West African English, people say furnitures all the time. And it's not a mistake. It's a regular, rule-based part of how English works there.
Or how about this one? I am understanding your point. Your old textbook would have slapped a big red X on that for sure. But in Indian English, using that ing form with a verb like understand is completely normal. It can show that you're in the process of understanding, or it can even make you sound more polite. See? Again, it's a feature, not a failure.
This amazing process has a name. It's called nativization. And it happens in all these incredibly creative ways. People invent new words, like cousin brother in India, which is actually way clearer than just cousin, right? They tweak the grammar, like repeating a word to add emphasis, saying something is different. And you even get brand new little words like the famous la in Singapore that can change the entire feel of a sentence.
And all of this brings us to a really important point about the world we live in today. For the huge majority of people who speak English around the globe, the goal just isn't to sound like you're from London or Los Angeles. That's not the point anymore.
Okay, so this breaks down two key concepts that can sound a little complicated, but the difference is actually pretty straightforward. On one side, you have world Englishes. Think of these as stable, local versions of the language, like Nigerian English that's used every day inside Nigeria. But on the other side, you have English as a lingua franca, or ELF. That's totally different. That's the super flexible, practical English people use to communicate between different countries. You know, like when an engineer from Germany needs to work with a designer from Brazil?
And for the millions and millions of conversations happening in ELF every single day, the goal has nothing to do with perfection. Nobody's trying to pass a grammar test. It's all about one thing: communicating successfully. It is, pure and simple, about getting the job done.
And people who are really good at speaking English as a lingua franca, they are masters of strategy. They're always rephrasing things to make sure they're being clear. They instinctively avoid weird local idioms that nobody would understand. You're not going to hear, "It's raining cats and dogs" in a global business meeting. The whole focus shifts from, "Is my grammar correct?" to, "Do we understand each other?" That's it.
All right, so if the reality of English today is this super dynamic, multicultural, functional tool, what does that mean for the future? The world is definitely changing, and you have to wonder if the status of English and the way we teach it is going to change right along with it.
I mean, as the world becomes more multipolar and power isn't just centered in one place, the whole language game could change. What happens if English has to share the spotlight with, say, Mandarin or Arabic or Spanish? What if brand new ways of teaching languages emerge from other parts of the world and become the new best practice? And what if, just imagine, our textbooks finally started talking about something other than shopping and celebrities and actually reflected what life is like for people all over the planet?
And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. The English that you and I were taught, it was a product of a very specific time, reflecting a certain flow of power and a certain set of ideas. But as our world gets more complex, more connected, and way more diverse, what will the English that we actually use tomorrow end up looking and sounding like? It's definitely something to think about.